Questions? I'm going to bring the microphone so that we can.
So I guess this will be addressed to either of you. I'm just wondering, so the post-cost benefit analysis, what happens to the infrastructure that's deemed like unworthy upgrades? And is there a vision, either in the work you're doing or you're doing, that repurposes that infrastructure or recycles the material in a way that still addresses the college issues?
In my experience, the infrastructure that's being upgraded or moved or relocated tends to be, it's a government infrastructure. So they do remove what's on the coastline to rebuild or relocate that, whatever that thing is, whether it's a sewage treatment facility that got moved inland or a road that had to be relocated. It's private properties that don't, and that's tends to be the focus of my work is that's where we have a gap in what we're requiring of people, because I know of lots of instances where they've put in shoreline structures and it's been damaged within the first year from ice, and because if it's not installed the correct way, or if the ice comes at it from the wrong angle, it's only going to last that 1 year and that's it. And so there is no process in place right now to require that to be cleaned up out of the waterway. I've been following the Federal Oceans Protection Act process this past year quite a bit, because they're quite adamant about boats that are abandoned and left sunk and that they have to be cleaned up. And I'm thinking, well, these coastal structures should fall into that same category, but they don't fall into the federal jurisdictions for environmental impacts as of right now anyways.
Yeah, I think for some of the work that we're seeing, and I think Kate Orff with Scape Studio is a good example of, if you're reusing, especially rubble and concrete, that can actually become like fish habitat for shellfish and others. There's a project right now ongoing in Vancouver that's the Iona wastewater treatment plant have a 1,500 meter jetty that houses its sewage pipe, but that the wastewater treatment plant is actually being upgraded, and so they don't need that pipe anymore. And so there's conversations starting right now with especially groups that are involved in kind of bringing salmon back or improving the pathways for the salmon. So the idea is to puncture part of the jetty, but keep it as a recreational amenity as well. So I think it's probably like a site and project specific where they reuse them or where it gets completely kind of cleaned up. But I think there's definitely benefits that in reusing some of these infrastructures. I think it just needs to be thought out and thought through.
Hello, I'm Carly. I'm an MLA student from Guelph, University of Guelph. I noticed that it's kind of conspicuous that the ASLA is not included on the list of national associations. And I'm wondering if either of you in your practice or research have experienced challenges internally with the profession of the correct approach to adaptation and climate change measures, and if you could speak to that. If not, then great.
I can comment on the ASLA, because I think they will be signing up very shortly. And Colleen, who I chair the committee with, just presented to the States, and they really are looking at Canada as a role model, I guess it is, that we're leading. And they, as an association, maybe want to depoliticize themselves or separate themselves from the current environment. And I think if you follow them on Twitter or Facebook, they are actually being quite vocal about when they disagree with a policy decision, which is new for them as an association. So I think that we'll see a lot more coming in the States.
Hi, Alan Tate, University of Manitoba. Keith, I know the situation looks bad enough from what you presented already in Vancouver, but I wonder whether you modelled the potential impact of earthquakes and subsequent tsunamis.
We're looking into it. I think it's. We were just having a conversation earlier during lunch that I think Calgary has had a flood. I think, you know, it's almost where something needs to happen in Vancouver, like a light, something not too dramatic, but something that gets people thinking across the boundary and across jurisdictions. But tsunamis are probably not a major issue because we have Vancouver Island, and it will, the Georgia Strait is quite calm itself. Yeah, but liquefaction is a major issue. So I think it's actually liquefaction of most of the lower lying areas, including Richmond and Delta, parts of Surrey, Port Coquitlam. So that's a major issue, and I think it goes back to, I think, some of what you mentioned as well, Hope, about kind of data collection and doing tests. And I think it's an exciting realm for me and for anyone, I think, as landscape architects, to kind of get an understanding of what comes into kind of modeling those things and how we can use it in our design work. But, you know, it's also easy to get caught up in the rabbit hole of kind of trying to get data and try to understand how others setting up and interpreting the data. So we're aware of it, but right now it's not necessarily the focus of some of the research projects that we're working on.
Like Ken had, actually, the representative of Asia Pacific for the IFLA region is gentleman, I can't remember his name offhand, but he's from Japan. And that's his area of research is landscape architecture and tsunami risks. So the research is out there, it's just beyond our borders.
And one thing I could add is that I think it's an important, obviously, in terms of the conversation of time. I think it's often, you know, even in BC, they're only using 1 meter by 2100, which I think is quite low, but it's also dangerous, I think, to attach a volume or some height to a specific time frame, because I think as soon as people hear 2100, they feel like, oh, that's 80 years away, I don't really have to worry about it. But the earthquake could happen any moment, and that could, you know, so I think it's this conversation about short-term and long-term implications, as well as hard and soft measures. And I think I mean, it's always being brought up as a player, but in terms of modeling or some of those risks, it's not yet.
My name is Jeff Frank. I'm a landscape architecture practitioner in Winnipeg, and I'm curious, the research that you're doing in Vancouver, the application of coordinating this information across disciplines, is that the professional practice on the West Coast as well, or is this exclusive to the university? How are the practitioners incorporating and disseminating this information in a interdisciplinary way?
Well, part of the project, the MyTax project, emerged from a frustration from the profession that first of all, there weren't many calls coming from the province or from municipalities to think holistically about sea level rise adaptation. And second, if they were framed from an engineering perspective where the landscape architects would always come in second, third, or, you know, they weren't kind of the major people to kind of conceive of the ideas. And so, so the idea was, okay, how can we actually make a coalition of 4 landscape architecture firms that are actually working together, are not competing with each other, but creating a body of knowledge that then hopefully they can disseminate and actually provide and give back to other professions. So we have what we call the stakeholder and expert committee, which we include engineers and other planners. And so every month in the summer we invite them and we talk about the processes we're going through, what we're trying to work on, and get feedback from their perspectives, what might be useful or not. So I'm not sure on the West Coast or on the East Coast how that goes, but I think in the, you know, it's maybe more of a Dutch model where landscape architects are operating more at a regional scale, whereas some of the landscape architecture practices in North America operate more at a site and neighborhood scale. So I think for me it's always been more natural to kind of look at the regional scale and start to think of how our knowledge base and our way of representation, visualizing, and kind of understanding systems can help facilitate but also direct some of the urban design and architectural questions and engineering questions. So I think there's there's this excitement within the Vancouver region about this professionally. So there's now opportunities that they might within Vancouver. There's talks about a rebuild by design in Vancouver. Since our current mayor was in San Francisco and was part of the Resilience by Design project that is now in San Francisco Bay Area. So that would be a major lift and opportunity for the region, especially for landscape architecture, to put themselves in the forefront of innovation.
Do you have something to add? Well, I think we're coast to coast, but we're very different scales in terms of what our associations are doing and our practitioners. Every landscape architect I can even think of in Hala is probably also a planner themselves or working within a firm that has planners. So we do very much work at all scales because there's so few of us. And I think the bigger thing is getting involved in the projects and not leaving it to the engineers or just the developers where they're not hiring designers at all. So I'm optimistic that our practitioners on the East are well aware of the issues. It's just getting themselves into the projects themselves.
Are there any other questions?
It's not as much a question as a comment that I think that it's a really interesting example of putting 4 students. We have MyTax here and looked at it for years thinking, how could we actually use this to, because it is a bit of a large organization, but it's a great idea to have 4 students or however many going into practices with essentially a set agenda, sort of, and then coming out and sharing that information. I think that it would be a great model for all cities across the country. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's I was just saying that we have for some reason. Is this me?
That's what you're saying.
Yeah, I think it's also it's great because I think we sometimes as academics we can dream up all sorts of sites and issues, but if they don't really touch the ground, sometimes I think what you're saying. I think the people involved that's incredibly important, and I think within firms there's often not enough time to actually do the research. So I think it makes a lot of sense to do it like this. I have to say it was quite. This was the first year we did it, and we can improve on things in terms of like allocation of time because the students are working part-time just on any project that are happening within the firm, and then part-time they're working on this research-specific project, and then we have to coordinate across firms, and so it's really nice in a way. I mean, it's again like we've heard a lot of conversation about it. It's much more about the process than maybe the specific outcomes. But yeah, it's an interesting opportunity that I think should be and can be replicated quite easily, I think.